Let's talk about happiness. Specifically, your happiness. Are you happy? If not, why do you think that is? For a lot of people who make things and share what they make online, myself included, we have a tendency to abdicate our happiness to the fickle whim of the mob. Not enough likes or hearts or even dollars can send us careening into a creative tailspin, questioning what we do and even who we are. If this sounds familiar to you, hopefully this conversation with Jon Wilkening will help you find your way back to making first and foremost for the joy of it, and not simply for the return. Well, it sounds lovely. But it is really kind of strange to have you on the other end. You know, I feel like we have both, you know, we had a rhythm for a while, and then, you know, life happens, and and so now when you jump back in, you're like, oh yeah, I remember this.
It's like riding a bike, but like you're real wobbly at first. And you're like, I hope I don't veer into traffic or hit a stop sign or something like that.
Right. Yeah. Well, and the last conversation was pretty heady, right? I mean, it was, and you know, a lot of our conversations are, but
I was going to say, when's the last one we didn't have a heady conversation?
Yeah. But you know, some of the stuff really came out of kind of left field, and you know, I don't know how much you want to dive back into that or how much of that was for public consumption, but it was fascinating. I even took notes, John.
Wow.
That's how interested I was. I took notes.
I'm an open book. I don't have a.
Well, let's dive into two things then, because there were two things that I wrote down that I've been noodling on for the past week and a half, since we talked about it. And the one thing was, you said, and I wrote it down, once you give an outside entity the power to make you happy, you have become a ship in the wind. So that's sort of number one. And this was part of we were talking about owning your happiness, right? Like who owns our happiness? Do we own it, or has that changed in the wake of social, where we've given this sort of disembodied audience, we've given the mob permission to grant us and dole out sort of happiness to us, you know? So I wonder if we could dive into some of that and sort of what prompted that for you, like where that came from, because you've made some pretty big realizations about not only your creative life, but personal life and how those things mix or don't mix lately.
Yeah, it's the last sort of, if you want to say, probably year and change have been rough because I came out of finance going, oh, I'm not a corporate guy, I'm an artist. And I sort of attached part of my identity to being an artist. And if you listen to pretty much all our conversations, recorded or not, that's basically me trying to figure out the sort of artistic path.
And to be clear, it wasn't, from my perspective, it wasn't I'm going to keep telling myself this until I believe it. You believed it straight away. It wasn't a fake it until you make it kind of a deal, right?
Yeah. And I don't think that is not true about me. But what I've been wrestling with is how much, like, I don't feel I'm the artist that has to create on a continual basis in order to almost like keep this mental health treadmill going.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes sense.
Is it a difference between saying sort of this is what I am, not who I am? Is that a distinction that helps to make that make more sense?
I think so.
Yeah.
I heard an interesting conversation, like side note, but I'll tie this in. I heard someone talking about how the thing about creative people is that they're so open. What marks creative people is they're open to ideas and experiences and new ways of thinking and doing, which is both great, but also has the distinction that because they're so willing to go in so many directions, that creative people often struggle with directions because they have a million options.
You don't say.
Yeah. There's not one thing to go ahead.
Right.
And I think, what marked the sort of the year and a half, this post finance world for me was that in some ways I put art and creativity in this box of artistic endeavors.
Mm-hmm.
That in order to call myself creative, I have to be creating art or creating this.
So there has to be sort of definable, recognizable product in order to claim that.
Correct.
Okay.
Where I'm slowly realizing that, like, the thing that really lights me up is taking a puzzle and solving that puzzle.
Almost regardless of what the subject matter is? Does it have to be and I've got my air quotes, a creative puzzle, or just a puzzle that you can sort of get to the bottom of and solve?
I think it's more of the subject matter doesn't matter in relation to the puzzle.
Mm-hmm.
And sort of what, towards to that happiness part was that I tried to solve the, like, making money with art for 5 years.
Right. And you tried to be fair, you tried a bunch of different models to make that work. I mean, It wasn't just, I'm going to do this one way. You really were sort of tacking and trying to course correct and analyze what worked, how it worked, why it worked. And on the other side, what didn't work, why it didn't work, how it didn't work, and sort of course correct along the way.
Correct.
Yeah.
And what ended up happening is I then took the artistic sort of endeavors and I replaced the product or the end result,
mm-hmm.
the object, I guess would probably be the best way to put it. The object, I replaced that as being the thing that I was trying to do, is create the best object. And it became, how do I create the best thing to make money?
So did the money portion of that become directly not responsible, but did it maybe unfairly influence your happiness and what kind of happiness you were able to achieve?
Oh, yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Because then it became, I couldn't do projects or make photographs just for the sake of making photographs. Because
could you ever?
Yeah, there was definitely a point where I was taking pictures back to the thing, to solve a puzzle.
Right.
Sort of, if you want to say, in the heyday of, or the peak of me trying to go, how would Ernst Haas take a photograph with a pinhole camera?
Right. Peak pinhole.
Yeah. Peak pinhole. That was a problem.
Right.
It had a definable thing, and I could work at it, and I could struggle at it, and I could really sink my teeth into it.
Sure. And there was joy in it. I mean, we talked about it multiple times for years, how much joy you got from sort of wrestling that pinhole beast to the ground and getting something new out of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, there is absolute joy in that because, but then, I quit a monetarily successful job at the bank, partly because I needed to mentally, but
Right.
There's monetary sacrifices that were being made that weren't just affecting me.
Sure.
And the longer I continued down the path without any success,
monetary success, you mean?
Monetary success.
Yeah.
The more that became it became one of those things where I mentally felt I had to pay off the risk that my wife was taking.
Yeah, I hear you. I hear you.
And so it became this situation where the more I pushed, the more I felt the stakes were increasing.
Mm-hmm.
And thus the more those things had to drive everything forward. Like it became one of those things where, I think I was talking to you the other time when, I went out west and I had a very specific goal of what I wanted to get out of it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Almost shot for shot. I mean, almost like to that degree of detail. Yeah.
I could see the book that I wanted to create out of the trip
before you even got there.
Yeah, before I even got there.
Yeah, sure.
And I basically set myself up for failure because I was going on a trip that I had no real control of because I was in a large party of family members who were going on vacation and I was just tagging along.
Right.
With this almost ulterior motive.
Yeah, sure.
So it was one of those where it's like, I can't get 12 people up at sunrise so I could get proper light. It has to be 11 o'clock when everyone is ready to go.
Right.
It becomes one of those things where because of the pressure I put on myself to get something out of this, I came in with an expectation. And so I then closed myself off to what the trip was.
Mm-hmm.
That I couldn't just enjoy the trip for what the trip was.
Right.
And respond to the trip that I was taking. I kept on trying to force this other trip onto the trip we're taking.
Sure.
Does that make sense? Do
you feel like maybe, I don't know, regret's a strong word, but is there something in there of you missed out on a trip with Miles that you'll almost never be able to take again because of time and circumstance and you had this other agenda that you had to try and work towards?
Yes and no.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, yes, because it would I done stuff differently? Yes, but we also had a blast.
Right.
Like it wasn't like we had a bad trip.
Sure.
It was
well,
one of those.
He wasn't aware of this other other agenda. He was just like, hey, I get to go somewhere I've never been with a ton of family members.
Yeah. So, and like, to be honest, I was probably like, I don't think from his perspective, the trip would have been any different per se. The beauty of a kid is they're just along, they haven't got to the point of expectations in their life.
Right. They're just happy to be playing.
Yeah, exactly.
They don't need the trophy, man. They're just happy to be on the field.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's I think where I struggled was that, there's a classic quote that, expectations are the thief of joy.
Mm-hmm.
And, that was where that sums up that trip.
Right. Could you make the case that was maybe the turning point that sort of led you to where you are now, or at least maybe nudged you to where you are now?
Yeah. No, absolutely.
Yeah.
Because it was one of those things where I was sort of setting up everything that what I mentally had planned to be the next step in my sort of the monetary side of photography.
Right.
Was sort of all built on what I thought I could get out of this trip.
Right. This was going to be your Americans.
Correct.
Yeah.
I mean, not to that extent, but yeah,
I don't want to be a pivot point for what would come next.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. It was one of those where I felt creatively stagnant with sort of the pinhole work because I had solved that puzzle.
Mm-hmm.
And
for you,
for me,
did the audience feel like you had solved it? I mean, did you still have people wanting more, or did the desire for the work trail off once you figured out or came to a realization that you had solved that problem?
I believe my interest in the work trailed off well before the audience interest in my work has trailed off. And a couple months ago, I was like, I felt guilty for not posting something on Instagram in a while. So I was just looking through archives, and I found a photo that was good that I hadn't posted, and so I posted it. And people were like, basically, the response was like, "Oh, there's the work we're used to seeing from him,"
right.
And like, I appreciate all the comments and support. Like, it's not like I'm fighting with my audience or anything like that. But there was a response of like, I was finally giving them something that like almost like an arrangement.
Sure.
Like, this is what I had signed up to give them, and I was finally giving them to it again. Right.
Well, it is an arrangement of sorts, right? I mean, it's I'm guilty of this just as much as anyone. Is we say, here's what you can expect from us, and then when we don't deliver that, there's that feeling of, wait a minute, but you said ...
Yeah.
And there's so much content. There's so much in the way of photography, in the way of podcasts, in the way of anything that can be consumed on a device. There's so much of that out there that it doesn't take long, I'm learning, for people to go, oh, you're not going to give me what we agreed on. I'm going to go over here because they are.
Yeah. And I almost think it's there's not even a malicious like that, almost
not
to
at
that
all.
extent.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where people go, I like this, I'm gonna follow this to get more of that, and it becomes almost like they get confused when you don't deliver. I mean, it'd be like going to McDonald's and then getting a Burger King sandwich. You're like,
wait a minute.
Hey.
You're wait a second.
You're like, I understand this is a burger.
Right.
Like, I ordered a burger and I got a burger.
Right.
But this is not what I ordered.
Right.
And so, I mean, I struggle a lot with when I become bored with what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm. Well, it starts to feel like work, doesn't
it? Yeah. No, absolutely. And the classic quote is, I could be productive or destructive.
Right.
You pick the option.
Right.
And once I had solved the puzzle in that pinhole work, then it was one of those things where it's like, I can't do this song and dance anymore. And then when the Out West felt like it failed, I think I said this last week, where I think I tried to squeeze the art so hard to get the dollars out of it that I ended up squeezing the joy out of it too.
Right.
And I think I think joy and sort of like wonder and all those positive mental emotions are the fuel for creative work.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we have a weird sort of messed up view of you have to be depressed to be creative and like all that.
Right.
And I don't buy it because in my experience, I've not met too many people who are in like a downward spiral or depressed who are able to make work at the level that they are when they're inspired or
sure
they got that spark. And so like I'm in this weird place where I'm have to try to figure out almost a new relationship with photography in that way.
Mm-hmm. Is it still photography? I mean, do you feel like there's another aspect of photography that will allow you to reclaim some of that joy? So it's effectively it's bent, not broken.
Yeah, I think so, because even though like I've taken probably one picture in the last 2 months, and it was on my cell phone.
Right.
But I still think of photographs that I want to take. There's still like project ideas that are bouncing around my head, but like I almost just want to work on them for a while and just be like, here's this thing I spent some time on. I don't care what you think about it, but like here's just so there's some proof of it existing before whatever happens to me. You know, that type of you know.
Are you able to do that and take away are you able to sort of recalibrate and remove the monetary part of it, the monetization part of it, and just get back to that making for the sake of making, or has too much damage been done in that respect?
No, I don't think so, because I've very much gotten to the point where it's like I'm no longer looking at it from the standpoint of this is going to be where I make money. I'm looking at it from the standpoint of how can I create projects to say what I want to say.
Right. Well, and there is that weird turning point, right? Where I like this, I like doing it, and I've got a particular aptitude for it. Therefore, I should be compensated for doing it.
Yeah. No, very much so. And like, I will argue that there's photographs in my portfolio that are really good. And
I completely agree. There's photographs in your portfolio in my house that are really good.
Yeah. Like I don't, in some ways, I don't suffer from like a weird view of like my work's not good, so I shouldn't be compensated with it. I look at it from the standpoint of monetizing artistic work is such a weird game that it was one of those things where like I tried to figure it out and I couldn't.
Right.
And there's
but you never took it personally, and that's what I respect. That's what and if I'm being completely honest, have a hard time understanding, because I tend to take it very personally.
How so?
Well, I tend to take it, if you're not, if I put out something for sale and you don't buy it, that means you don't like it. And because there's a lot of me in it, you don't like me.
Got okay.
I get that back to because it's personal. I take a personal offense that it's not being received or whatever. And it's different with the podcasting versus the painting and the photography. And I had a friend point out the other day, and I love him for it. Gareth, thank you. He was like, you're not a photographer, man. You're a guy with a camera who takes some good pictures. So just let it go and enjoy it for what it is.
How many times have I told you that?
A lot. A lot. But it's that classic thing. You're not ready to hear it until you're ready to hear it. And you almost have to hit that that you have to hit the bottom. You know, what's the Fight Club? It's only when you've lost everything that you can accomplish anything.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
And I'm not making the case that I've lost everything. It's not that dramatic, but making the real, again, it's that expectation that because I enjoy this and exhibit some semblance of aptitude, I should be received as ... And that's just, well, it's just not right, is it?
Yeah. No. And like, sort of back to the initial question on sort of the root of happiness. You know, I have found that there's a lot of people that use other things to fill the happiness void in their lives. And they use relationships, they use other people, they use substances, they use different things to drive that happiness. And it goes great until it doesn't. And then it just falls apart because they have no control over the happiness that they're generating. And so, like, I know for like one individual, they used relationships as a means to define their happiness. And so they would put themselves in they would basically do whatever they could to get in and be whoever they had to be in a relationship.
To make that relationship work, quote unquote.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's one of those things where you're like, it's like, I know you and you hate doing this stuff.
Right.
Like,
so they would be disingenuous to their own sort of sense of self, just to make the relationship work because that's what provided them with a sense of happiness, whether that was a true or a false sense of happiness.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
And so it's funny that, you know, that sort of the happy ending to the story is that through a very bad relationship, they've sort of come to terms with that and sort of realized that. And they are going through the process of figuring out exactly who they are and trying to be the realest version of who they are. And then if a relationship happens, it happens. If it doesn't, it doesn't. Like that sort of like, this is who I am, take it or leave it type thing that you need to get a healthy relationship.
Well, I think we can do that with what we make. I think our relationship to what we make can very easily become a bad relationship.
Oh, 100%.
It sometimes just takes a while. Speaking for a friend, to realize it and go, oh, okay. But I think you're right in that creating for the sake of creating, just to see the work out in the world, not to see how many sort of clicks and likes and follows it has garnered, is the healthiest approach and the most authentic.
Yeah. And I think you mentioned early on in this conversation about how social media is you're giving the mob access to pass judgment on your creative endeavors without actually earning the right to judge your work.
Right.
And like, I think that's people have access to then just toss whatever they want at you without any sort of thought on how that is received. And it just basically plays mental havoc.
Right.
You know, and like our town does an arts festival every year. And I bought a booth and set up and put all my work up there. And the amount of comments I got from people who were like, oh, I didn't know you could keep these blurry shots. Or this is smart. If you just put a frame over what I usually delete, it becomes art. Like,
right.
Like, oh, I could do that. Like the
completely discounting the purpose and intent behind the work.
100%. And like without any sort of thought on how that would sound.
Right.
Would just walk
was
into
that my outside
booth,
voice?
just walk into my booth, lob that grenade in, and just walk off.
Right. To get a churro or something.
Yeah, whatever. and it was like, oh, this is social media in real life.
Right. Right. This is the effect. Right.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of people are awesome on social media, and I've made a lot of really good friends on social media, but like it's one of those weird human nature things where you could have 100 people tell them their work's the best thing they've ever seen, and one person go by and go, did a child make that?
Right.
And you're like,
you're deflated.
It'll spin out so bad.
You go home and throw everything in the dumpster, and you're like, screw this. Yeah.
So, yeah.
So in light of all this, do you sort of on the back of all of these realizations, do you think that you are closer to reclaiming your own happiness as it relates to making the work?
Yeah, because I think once the combination of time not creating stuff and mentally disconnecting the end product and the monetary thing, that combination I think is slowly getting to the point where it's like, hey, I want to actually do something.
Right. You almost had to let that taste sort of completely dissipate before you try something either new or even familiar.
Yeah, and it's also like spending enough time to get it out of my system to stop looking at it from that perspective. That I could just try to do this without any expectations.
Right. Are there other problems that you are seeing that need solving within the realm of Pinhole, or is your photography about to change fairly dramatically in the wake of this? Do you have any sense of one or the other at this point?
My guess is that my Pinhole career is probably over. I think I'll probably go into more like, and maybe like portraiture and that type of, but on like a big scale. I've been messing around with the idea of giant cameras for a while.
Right.
And it's one of those things where I haven't solved that problem.
Right.
So it's been bouncing around in my head for
long
enough. I'm a sucker for those problems.
Is the problem with the giant camera work, is it a technical problem, or is it an aesthetic problem, or is it a combination of both? Does one serve and inform the other, and that's what makes it a little more difficult than maybe the Pinhole work?
The problem is a couple fold. Because of the scale, the cost is higher than normal. And especially when they're sort of not in a financial state to take risks that are not showing any sort of signs of monetary success.
Sure. Yeah, you can't go with like the Ian Reuter, $500 every time you click the shutter.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's though it basically came down to where I had such little excess bandwidth, monetarily speaking, that I couldn't just have like a creative problem to just putz around with.
Right.
And then on top of it, because it's such a new avenue for me, I haven't taken a lot of portraits.
Right.
Like, it's a whole nother world getting into.
Right. There's a lot of lab time ahead, just sort of working through it. Yeah, I hear you.
Yeah, like it becomes one of those things where there's so many more problems to be solved to be able to not only execute it from just a pure get a photograph on a piece of paper or glass or whatever it is, but like then it becomes, does the picture say what I want it to say?
Mm-hmm.
Like there's whole nother layers to those questions.
Sure. Is it possible to separate the two into almost you diverge the paths and then bring them back together? So you solve the portraiture, or at least embrace the portraiture and get yourself into that process on a smaller scale. And when you start to feel more comfortable with the mechanics of a relationship to a subject and the aesthetics of what you're trying to get, can you then merge that back with the larger format? So you're not experimenting at 20 by 24 or 20 by 30 at a time.
Oh yeah, that's probably the smart way to do it.
But we don't take the smart way when we do these things. Yeah.
No. So someone said their autobiography should be "I take the long, stupid, hard route."
Right.
And I resonate with that 100%.
Yeah. The companion volume to my own, which is what did you say? I may have overthought this.
Yeah. No, but like it's one of those things where like I almost look at it from the standpoint of I want to shoot large format.
Mm-hmm.
Like I want to take the time and really like, yeah, I've shot, so many rolls of film in a day, but what does it look like when instead of like I'm deliberate and I've taken 3 exposures in a day?
Right.
And
it's something you keep coming back to. Since I've known you, this fascination, there's almost a pre-joy. There's a pre-joy associated with it, despite the fact that you haven't, you're ankle deep. You've got the big lenses. You've figured out the physics behind how you're going to be able to pull this off. It really is sort of that monetary component that is hindering the bulk of it.
Yeah. No, exactly. And this may be entirely because I'm fascinated. Ian Ruler was such a big like catalyst in my own work.
Sure.
It may be in large part because of that. But there's a wonder to having a giant object and then being able to take a picture of someone and then pull this giant object out that they've never seen before.
Mm-hmm.
And just that unrestrained sort of wonder that people get from that type of object, because it's so outside of how people view photography in large part today.
Mm-hmm.
It's so different, and that's in some ways I think why it fascinates me in such a way, because I'm taking this thing that we're so used to seeing on our smartphones. Instagram's probably one of the most viewed things. Who knows how many images people see on a day-to-day basis.
Sure.
But holding a 20 by 24 portrait of themselves, that will probably impact them more with a single frame than, fill in the blank hours of scrolling through Instagram.
Sure. I think you're right. And I think you see that in, some of the images and the footage of like Chuck Close using the big Polaroid camera or seeing Ian at work and seeing the reactions that people have to these giant, 4 or 5 foot plates. It is something that we've never seen or haven't seen in person, maybe. And there is a sense of awe and, to use your words, a sense of wonder about that.
Yeah. And I think that's in part what good creative outputs are best at. Walking through Sally Mann's work with you, the portrait gallery, and like just standing in front of some of those pieces. Yeah, they have so much social context to them. Yeah, they're not just images. But at the same time, like I struggle with I struggle with people who could go through a display like that without any, any sort of, I don't know. It doesn't make them stop. Let's put it that way.
Right. Yeah, there's almost you expect almost a respect, or even on the far end, a reverence to the object itself.
Yeah.
So how does that relate to? Are you okay? This is from a space of love.
Sure.
Are you unhappy in the wake of all of this, or is the possibility of it sort of rekindling that sense of joy for the creative process that started to go out with your trip out west? Does that make sense?
Yeah. No. It's something where like it's a process of me getting back into the headspace enough to be able to get to the point where I'm excited about making something that I haven't seen or created before. And I think part of that is with the time and space of not creating stuff, it just becomes one of those things where eventually I'm like, well, I got to do something. And I don't mean that from like a have to do something, but it just becomes my own curiosity of what I can create and do sort of sparks up.
It's been silent too long. You have to sort of.
Like I'm a creative person for a reason. And it's something where even if it doesn't always have to manifest in a creative output, like any problem can be approached creatively. That having it's something where those creative artistic outputs are the most classic.
Sure.
So,
but they're not the only potential solutions.
No. And so right now I've been in some ways working on fixing the monetary situation in our lives through other outlets. And that's been taking a lot of my time of recent. But it's also something where I know that's not going to last forever.
Right. But on some level, it's got to give room. I mean, getting that component sort of sorted in a different fashion, it seems like it's making room for you to fall back in love with the creative process without having to saddle it with a monetary return.
100% agreed. Without having that pressure to create, the goal just becomes, what's the coolest thing I can make? And what can I do that would be best, like most get me excited? And so looking at how I can create that own sort of wonder and sort of spark that curiosity in me creatively, I think is what drives me to create in the first place.
Right.
And I think, I mean, it goes to a whole other discussion, but I think creativity lives in those empty spaces, and it lives in parts when you're not trying to fill it. it loves boredom. You know, it loves when it's been given too much space.
Subscribe to Jeffrey Sidoris Everything in your favorite podcast app to get every episode of In Between, every iteration, every process driven, as well as special one-off conversations all in one feed. You can connect with me on Instagram and Twitter at Jeffrey Sidoris, that's JEFFERYSADDORIS, or on my website at jeffreysidoris.com. You can find Jon on Instagram at Jon Wilkening, that's JONWILKENING, or by visiting his website at jonwilkening.com. Thank you very much for listening. I appreciate you being here. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will talk to you on the next one.